Hey BookTube, I'm back for another video. This video is going to be a bit of a different video. I know I don't do a lot of tags on my channel, and that's more due to my own laziness than anything else, but I decided, out of whim, to create my own tag, an original tag called the Snob-O-Meter Tag. And this tag is prompted because I've been thinking a lot about snobbery lately, and I want to further the discussion and see what other people think, and just to encourage debate and friendly disagreement or friendly agreement. And so the point of this tag is to ask a bunch of controversial questions that relate to snobbery and to see where you measure up, which explains the title, the Snob-O-Meter Tag. And just a quick note is that this tag is not intended to be a tag of gotcha questions or to out people who may out people as snobs or anything like that. It's meant to be fun and to just get the conversation rolling. So, and another note, I know there is another tag about snobbery, an old tag called the Book Snob Tag, and I know, and my questions slightly overlap a little bit, but I tried to make it as distinctly my own in its conception. So if there's any plagiarism, I hope that you don't cancel me and that there'll be some forgiveness if you've done that tag in the past. So I'll get right into it. I'll start off with the first question. What is your definition of book snobbery? And I would say my definition of book snobbery is condescending behavior towards people for what they read. And I think that's fairly self-explanatory. The whole idea of snobbery is in the condescension towards others, where you think in some sense that you are better. So, and then since we're bookish people here on BookTube, book snobbery would extend to how people read, and you're judging other people's reading in your condescension. Question number 2. Is there a genre or type of book you would never consider reading, i.e. romance or sci-fi or any other kind of genre? And the closest I could come up with would be like business books. And I do a lot of thrifting, so buying books at thrift stores, and thrift stores usually like to organize them based on section. And I see like they have usually a couple of shelves for business books, and just looking at those titles and my vague idea of what they're about, just they seem as the most dishonest kind of book, because they're trying to sell you something, selling you a load of crap, and in the under the guise of trying to help you out, and it just seems a waste of my time, and also, most damningly, the most boring kind of literature. Like a business or a finance book just seems absolutely boring, and maybe that just exposes my own ineptitude on these subjects. But if there was a really good, really interesting, worthwhile book to read that is business, I might consider it, but it's highly unlikely. I have way more other genres that I have just a pile of books that I'd want to read first. So that's not a high priority. Let's just say that. Number 3. Now we get into controversial territory. Does erotica count as literature? I want to say no, but I hesitate to, because who am I to decide what's literature and what's not? The most I can say is that it counts as bad literature, in the sense that my understanding of erotica is that it's got a very distinct purpose to it, and I kind of find that soiling, and maybe it's part of my hesitation too with contemporary romance, is because so much from my understanding, having never actually approached the romance genre in its contemporary form. It has a lot of erotic elements in it, and especially a lot of the covers are off-putting in that sense too. So I don't know. I since I haven't actually read any of it, I can't really say for myself, though. Just my intuitive gut feeling wants to say no, and that, or at least at the most, say that it's bad literature. So that'll be my answer. I look forward to hearing what other people have to say about this from this question. And then question number 4: is it better to read classics than popular bestsellers? Another argument-starting question, and my answer to this one will be a little bit, or tries to be a little bit more nuanced, in the sense that it depends what your reading goals are. If your goals are to keep up with current trends and to keep up with conversations about newly published books, for example, if you like following book prizes and whatnot, then of course reading popular bestsellers would be the better way to go. But if you're like me and you are more interested in books that have stood the test of time, that I guess have decades and even centuries of hype around them, versus say the hype of a particular book season, then classics are the better way to go. And I would say, for me at least, I see classics as worthwhile reads, or guaranteed worthwhile reads, where I may not like the book, or I may not get along with the book, but it's at least worth my time, because there's influence there, and that there's it's not a book that's stuck in a vacuum. For example, if you read a book that, say, won the Pulitzer Prize from 1942 or whatever, just throwing out a random number out there, that was the biggest, hottest book of the season maybe during that year, but no one reads it now, and there's no conversation. But if you read, say, a Virginia Woolf novel, then of course there's a conversation that's been ongoing as previous generations or continuing generations encounter her work, and I like that a lot more than the latest hype, the latest trends. And then we move on to question number 5. Have you ever bragged about reading a classic in order to sound smart? And yes, I have, but in a qualified sense, namely that normally what you would think of for this prompt is going to a party and name dropping like James Joyce or something, or just trying to sound smart by name dropping a bunch of classic authors that you've read and whatnot. But this may come as a surprise book too, but I don't go to parties, and so I don't name drop books even, and usually I'm quite embarrassed to do so. For example, over the summer I was asked what I was reading, and I said Plato, and I said it almost bashfully, like I was quite embarrassed. I almost wish I could have said like Colleen Hoover or something, because that would have not elicited so many questions. But anyways, there's a story I have to tell here for this prompt. I have a friend who I occasionally meet up for coffee with, and he's a bit of a dude bro in the sense that he likes Cormac McCarthy and Quentin Tarantino movies and those kinds of literature. And so when we had gotten together at the time, I was reading Proust, and I was probably halfway through or almost done, and I name dropped Proust as like this massive work that I was reading. I was basically bragging about, because I was so proud of myself for reading Proust at the time, or at least during that conversation, and I got a very deserved response in the sense that he didn't even know who Proust was, and so here I was trying to basically stuttering, thinking I had this, trying to explain who Proust was and why it was so great that I had been reading him. And I say I quite deserve that reaction because name dropping, reading books just for the sake of name dropping, or even or name dropping of any kind is well, it's a snobbish thing to do, right? And that's not what we read for, or at least that's not what we should be reading for. At least that's in my sense. Maybe you have a different response in your tag, or your response to these questions. Question number 6. Do audiobooks count as reading? And I wanted to extend that to comic books and to graphic novels too. Do graphic novels count as reading? And for audiobooks, I would say no, just because to me it seems like it's more of a audio performance than it is any kind of reading of that you would know. Like you can't reread and annotate and think on your own. You're listening to someone else perform the work through their own voice. So it would be like there's no, unless you're reading the book, like you're following along with the audiobook as you read the book. I wouldn't count audiobooks as reading, because reading is a very distinct process with your eyes and how you comprehend words on the page, and audiobooks take that out entirely, which is not to say that reading audiobooks are any lesser than reading a physical book, because they're different. For me, at least, they're different mediums, and so you can't really compare them because you go to them for different reasons. At least that's in my sense. Now, when it comes to comic books and graphic novels, I think they're both trying to do different things than what we would normally consider when we read. For example, I think graphic novels are largely a visual medium, though I can't say for certain because I'm not well versed in graphic novels. I don't recall having actually read any. I've flipped through a few, but not in a sense of reading a full graphic novel front to back. So I don't know if that would if maybe those have more text in them, and there's it's like a combination of text and images. But for comic books, at least, I would say probably not, because the most you got are those like speech bubbles and whatnot. But it's appealing to a different part of the visual experience than what we normally consider a novel or a work of nonfiction is trying to do. And again, not to say that any of these are lesser. It's just that they're just different in their aims, in which you consume the content, if that makes any sense. Now we go to question number 7. Have you ever looked down at someone for reading a popular fluff book? And here I define a popular fluff book as a book with or with little substance to it, which is an open definition, so you can really insert what you would think in there. And for me, a fluff book, an example would be like a celebrity memoir, or some kind of self-help book, or something like that. And I have to again cringe when I say that yes, I have, and I don't like the feeling of it, and if noticed it in me and felt bad about it, which is why I say that I've been thinking about snobbery lately, because what exactly is snobbery, and or what exactly is this? Is it right to feel, or what is it exactly does it mean to feel snobbery, and like how do you counter that in yourself when you feel guilty about it? And for here, I would say when it comes to me and my reading, again with the book about classics and popular bestsellers, I avoid trends. I avoid anything that is super trendy, and it's almost to a fault. because then you think that you're better than the people who fall for trends, which is not the case, and it's very important to keep that in mind. But then again, I still don't like, regardless, I still don't like bandwagons or anything like that, and so I still make a point of avoiding it, even if it becomes avoiding it to a fault. Just a random example is the novel James by Percival Everett. I would like to read that book someday, but I'm not going to read that anytime soon. I'll give it a span of 5-10 years, and then maybe I'll come back to it, and once its place in, say, literary history or recent literary contemporary history has evolved and more or less kind of carved its little niche in publishing history, and see if it has stuck around as so many people think it might, and whatnot. And so I'll give that a few years first, but and that's not to say that it's wrong if you fell for that hype or anything, but it's just and I wouldn't consider James a fluff book, for example. I do have an example here, but I don't know if I want to share it. Let's just say that I knew someone, or there was someone who was reading Spare, the book by Prince Harry, and they took it out from the library, and I felt like it was the utter fluff book, the book that will have no substance, which is an obvious money grab, an obvious waste of time, and yet it was a huge mega bestseller, and everyone seemingly wanted to read it, and it seemed like the author was exploiting that fact that everyone would want to read a gossipy book like that, and I don't know, it seems kind of soiling to me that one would waste one's rare reading time reading such a book. And then, so I felt myself kind of like looking down, like, oh, you're reading that? I didn't say that, of course, but I really should have been curious instead. I should have been more like questioning, like, ooh, you're reading Spare. What do you think of it? Like, why would you pick up reading it in the first place? That kind of thing. Just being curious instead of being like smugly like, ooh, I'm reading something better than that. I'm doing it. So I don't know. That's my example of having looked down at someone for reading a fluff book. Of course, it's not a proud moment, but it's sometimes reactions like these that I want to see in myself and be able to counter. Of course. So number 8 is the flip side of number 7. So number 8 is, have you ever been the recipient of someone else's snobbery? And yes, I have. Because so I am part of a Facebook classics group. I'm not very active on Facebook anymore, but I used to be a bit more, where there's like this Facebook group for reading classics, and you can just share about what you're reading and have conversations revolving around classic books, which I quite enjoy, because classics are usually what I tend to read. And at the end of the year, this was a few years ago, at the end of the year, people were sharing like their favorite reads of the year and whatnot. And so I shared my top 10 favorite books of the year, which included a lot of classics on there, but not all of them, including number 1. Number 1 on my list that year was The Vampire Lestat by Anne Rice. And I got some snobbish comments about that, saying, you can basically dismissing my entire list of my favorite reads that year because I had an Anne Rice novel on my list, and it didn't bother me that much. I felt more pity for that person than anything, because their Vampire Lestat is a great read, and they're missing out on a good read, and if they're so close-minded as to not want to encounter such a book. So, and I found that book was absolutely fantastic, and I consider it one of my favorite books actually. So I'll stand by that. I think it's a great book. And I'm almost certain that person has never read Anne Rice, or if they have, maybe they didn't give her that much of a chance. So that's question number 8. Number 9, would you ever be friends with a snob, or maybe you already are? And I am not friends with any snobs that I know of, though I wouldn't be against it if the snobbery was unconscious, in the sense that they were still largely a good person, and their snobbery was kind of unconscious, where it wasn't a deliberate snobbery, where they were still good people, for the most part, other than that. And of course we all have our flaws, and so snobbery could just be one of those flaws that someone has to get over in order to improve as a person. But I would never be friends with those special type of snobs, those literary snobs, where they have the leather elbow patches and they talk about reading capital C classics with an air of condescension to them, where they always talk about, and it's basically an in-group battle about who can read the best quote-unquote quality literature, and we're reading classics has an air of religious, of like a religious undertone to it. So you're, I don't know, they make me very uncomfortable, and I don't really want to be a part of that, because that's not why I read. I don't read to show off or to pose or to, I don't know, I think that covers it, to show off. I read for enjoyment, and I read to learn and to grow, and I don't read to put on airs. Let's put it that way. And that leads us to question number 10. Are people who don't read less sophisticated than people who do? Again, another fight-starting question, a question that can be very uncomfortable to ask. And I'm going to say, I'm tempted to say yes, but before you show up at my door with a pitchfork, let me explain my answer. When we think of reading, we think reading undeniably has a lot of benefits to it, which is why us as readers are so engaged in reading, and why we prioritize so much of our time to this activity. We think that not only is it fun, of course, but it has a lot of benefits that you can't really get anywhere else, and that we're constantly chasing after. And the more you read, the more you realize that, and the more you change. And I think the Uncommon Reader by Alan Bennett that I just recently read really explores this so well, about how the Queen changes as a person as she becomes a reader. She once never gave any considered thought to her servants. She never really thought about the feelings of the people that she encountered in her day-to-day life, or with the important people that she would meet for public appearances. And all of a sudden, she found herself changing in an important way as a person, as she ended up reading more. And I think reading does that to people. It really changes. I can't go into all those changes now, because it's hard to put it into words, but we know that they're all there. And so if we think that reading like enriches your life, it has certain benefits to it, then on the flip side, that means not reading, the lack of reading will, of course, make one's life, or at least it would make my life more shallow. It would, there would be a certain lack there that you would be missing, that you could develop if one became a reader. And the key distinction here is that readers cannot or shouldn't look condescendingly on people who can't read, or people who don't read regularly. That's part of the issue with a question like this, is when you say that people are who don't read are less sophisticated, it's seen as like a condescending question. But it shouldn't, because reading does have benefits to it, just as, say, exercising has benefits to it. And exercising is a lot better for you than not exercising. And that's not a snobbish thing to say. That's just a fact. Though, of course, people like to use that fact as a means towards condescension, which is the wrong way to go about it. And what we should be doing is trying to get people on our side, trying to convince people that reading is fun, but it's a fun activity that has a lot going for it, and that's a good reason to start reading. And we should be encouraging and be helping these people to find books that they would want to read in order for them to become readers. So I think that would be my response to this question. Being a reader does not justify snobbery over people who don't read, or for people who waste their time, say, I don't know, on Instagram or playing video games for 6 hours a day. It doesn't justify snobbery towards that. It just means that those ways are the other ways of spending your time. You could waste your time, or you could use that time to do something productive, but that can also be fun. And so that would be my question for number 10. We have question number 11. Measure yourself. Based on your answers to the previous 10 questions, would you qualify as a snob? And I hope not. I don't think so, based on my answers to these questions. I have had the temptation. The temptation is there to be a snob, especially since, like, here am I holding up Aristotle because I'm reading Aristotle or whatever. And I'm very conscious about that when people ask what I'm reading. So I'm always usually pretty vague when people ask what I'm reading, because it's, to say I'm reading Aristotle is usually a bit jarring for some people, especially for people who don't read. So I don't want to be a snob at all, and I try to actively work against that idea, because just because I'm reading Aristotle doesn't mean everyone else is lesser for not reading Aristotle. In fact, I'd quite understand it if you want to dismiss Aristotle, or at least avoid him, because Aristotle is not the most fun read, we shall say, but I have my reasons for reading him, and you have your reasons for not reading him, and I think that's just fine. And so I would say condescension in general is just a loathsome thing, and it's a very soiling experience when, like, being a condescending person or being a snobbish person is just something terribly ugly about it, and not just because it has bad effects towards other people, but also because it feels bad when people are snobbish towards you. And I think what I said before, when someone was snobbish towards me for reading Anne Rice, I think you should have more pity for people who are snobbish, and leave it at that, because it's really a shameful place, or at least a really a terrible place to be, and not because of the effects necessarily towards you, but because no one should want to be a snob. I should say it that way. And the last question is to tag people, or the last prompt. Prompt number 12 is to tag people. So I'm going to tag 6 people, or 6 or 7 people, and I'll throw out this original tag to you guys, and throw it out into the world, see what happens. Maybe one person will do it, maybe no one will ever do it, and then I'll be stuck here talking about snobbery in this little vacuum of my YouTube channel, or my booktube channel. But I hope not. I hope everyone does this tag. If I don't tag you, you can still do the tag. I welcome any response. But the ones I will tag, I'll tag Aaron Facer, Steve Donahue, Josh Crebo, James at Quainting Curious Volumes, Aaron the Book Baron. I recommend everyone to check out his channel. It's very good. To readers, it may concern, and was it Must Read More or Must Read More, or I think that's his channel name. Yeah, I'll take all these people down in the description, and I'll also leave all the questions there. So yeah, that is the Snob-O-Meter Tag. I hope it makes its rounds, even though it's not Tag Tuesday. So we'll do that. We'll see you next time. See you, Book 2.